Alright, I'll cast Essence Flux targeting my commander Rusko. He'll trigger and I'll put a counter on each of my 6 midnight clocks. Everyone will lose 1 and I'll gain 1. This clock will trigger and I'll shuffle my hand in and draw 7 cards. Then Rusko will flicker and I'll make another clock. I'll keep doing this until you're all drained. GG? So believe it or not, those mad lads at Wizards actually did something I thought they'd never do. With the coming of Mystery Booster 2, they've printed previously Arena exclusive cards like Rusko Clockmaker into paper. This wild Dimir legend is one that I had seen a while ago and wished that I could play in paper, and now we can. Kind of. You see, Rusko is an Acorn stamped legend, meaning he's not technically legal in Commander still, just like other Acorn stamped unset cards. But like a lot of folks, we look at him and ask why he can't be legal in the format. So let's read him closer and break that down. Rusko is a 4-mana 3/3 human artificer that reads, when Rusko Clockmaker enters, conjure a card named Midnight Clock onto the battlefield. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, put an hour counter on each permanent you control named Midnight Clock. Each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. Many of you sharp-eyed viewers might find reasons why he's Acorn stamped right there. And that is that Conjure does not have meaning or context in paper magic, only digital magic. See, Conjure is shorthand for a few things, namely to create a card. In Arena, these cards can be created and put into your hand, into play, or even shuffled into your library. That means that these are not tokens. That's the big mistake players make. These are physical cards themselves. And in paper magic, you cannot change the number of cards in your deck during the game. It's why things like wishes don't work in Commander either. A lot of folks look at this and ask why it can't create a token instead. Ideally, it could create a token, but you need to have all of the details of what a Midnight Clock is written on the card, and that just isn't possible in the space of a Rusko, for instance. So Conjure it has to be, and that's a lot of fun in and of itself. So let's take a look at the card Rusko makes, Midnight Clock. Midnight Clock is a 3-mana mana rock for blue mana. You can pay 3 mana to put an hour counter on the clock, and at the beginning of each upkeep, yours and your opponent's, you put a counter on the clock too. And when there are 12 counters on the clock, which without interference would be 3 whole turn cycles in a 4-player game, you shuffle your hand and graveyard into your library and draw 7 cards. It's a personal wheel, it's personal mill insurance, and it's a way to keep drawing gas, but I think most importantly, it's a mana rock. This means your commander can help pay for its own commander tax pretty easily, making a mana rock on enters. Pair Rusko with a Panharmonicon or a Virtue of Knowledge, and you pay 4 mana to create 2 mana rocks. You could be sacrificing Rusko and replaying him every turn to make more clocks, to draw more cards, and that's just at a pretty basic level. See, Rusko's second ability speeds up all of your clocks while draining opponents on something as harmless as a non-creature spell cast, representing a death by 1,000 cuts win con when you can also turn every spell cast into a fresh wheel for yourself. Add on top of that something like an Alhammarret's Archive or a Teferi's Ageless Insight, and each clock draws you 14 cards, basically ensuring you will always draw some kind of blink spell to drain your opponents, make a new clock, and keep yourself gassed up. Remember that these are cards, not tokens that we're creating, meaning when you make a Midnight Clock with a Rusko, it can be bounced to your hand and, unlike a token, won't cease to exist. Or someone can blow up all of your artifacts and all of your clocks will go back to the graveyard. They can then be reclaimed from the graveyard and then can be shuffled into your library too. The implications to that are pretty wild. For instance, we can see exactly how many clocks we can make, and then have a sub-goal of seeing if we can end up with a hand of exactly 7 Midnight Clocks. Or we can see if we can create more winding clocks than cards in our library at the start of the game. Hell, we could see if we can create hundreds of unwinding clocks, get them all to shuffle into our library, and win with a battle of wits from a starting deck of just 100 cards. Now that sounds like a fun challenge. There is a quick and easy way that we can make infinite Midnight Clocks too. All you need is your commander paired with a Deadeye Navigator, along with any effect that doubles your Enter's triggers. Since Deadeye Navigator blinks a creature for just 2 mana, when Rusko enters with his trigger doubled, you make 2 clocks that each tap for a mana. That pays for the blink activation on Deadeye Navigator, meaning we can make infinite clocks. The ticking alone will drive your opponents insane. If we pack the deck with blink effects, even without an infinite clock engine, the ability to reshuffle our graveyard into our library and draw a fresh grip of cards means we need about 15 spells that can blink Rusko in some way to, mathematically, always be able to draw one off of a clock trigger. That can be pretty easy as we're spoiled for choice here. Essence Flux, Planar Incision, and Teferi's Time Twist, along with a literal dozen other options, are fantastic for us. So are creatures that blink like Displacer Kitten, Thassa Deep Dwelling, and the previously mentioned Deadeye Navigator. All reliable, repeatable ways to keep the clock ticking. But we can get scammy on things too, with effects like Malakir Rebirth, Supernatural Stamina, and Not Dead After All, entirely capable of bringing Rusko back from death for another trigger if we have a sack outlet or if an opponent attacks at us for any kind of damage. And if the death by 1,000 cuts approach isn't viable, we can get balmy with it too. The more clocks we make, the bigger an activation from Tezzeret Master of the Bridge gets, draining opponents equal to the number of artifacts we control. With all of our clocks being artifacts, that can get pretty big fast. If we then blink Tezzeret too, we can activate him over and over again for a fast win. And even the classic Grey Merchant of Asphodel makes for a backup blink target, and puts our life total so far out of reach of our opponents that we may just win from attrition alone. We can't be decked with all of our clocks ticking after all. The only real downside being that yes, Rusko technically is not legal in Commander, so you do need to have a conversation with your friends and opponents before sitting down and playing him, if they're okay with you gently bending the rules to play something wacky, something different, and something fun. I know I'd be perfectly fine with it, and I want to see all of the wild things you do now that we have a paper version of this commander. Drop your combos and deck lists and how you feel about Rusko Clockmaker down in the comments. If you want to see my full brew, check it out linked in the comments at my sponsor, Moxfield. Moxfield is the best deck building platform in the world and makes it easy to brew around even commanders that aren't technically legal in the format. While you're checking out my deck list, be sure to follow my profile to never miss a new deck. And while you're here, be sure to check out these other videos on the channel. If you were inspired to build today, you have to hit that subscribe button. And as always, folks, good luck and have fun.